So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Tonight, going to be tasting some great whiskey. This evening's going to be all about Australian whiskey, a celebration really of Australian whiskey, Tasmanian whiskey, and one of the first distilleries to start really producing whiskey in Australia, and I guess put Australia on the map for whiskey, the way we see the industry going now. And so it's quite an exciting time when a distillery hits 30 years of producing and what it's gone through, what it's doing now, and then what it's probably going to do in the future. And it's really good to deep dive into this whiskey, have a really good taste of lots of different whiskies that they're producing, but most of all, talk to the guy that's behind it all and who's been behind it all for the past, not just 5 years or 10 years, the past 15 years. So today we've got Chris Thomson with us, all the way from Tassie, who's tuning in and who's going to talk us through these whiskies and what we can expect from them, maybe some tasting notes. And obviously, what I want to hear from Chris is about him, what influences him at the distillery, how he copes with his team, what he does to motivate that team, producing new product, and having a bit of fun with this whiskey and try to get some really nice tasting notes out here. Chris, we welcome you.
Cheers, thanks.
No worries at all.
Hi everyone, how are you? I hope you can hear me all right. I'm perched in my my spare room at home with the kids going to bed, just like through that door. So we may get a surprise visitor every now and then, and they'll tell me that I said I was doing some work and that I shouldn't be drinking whiskey at work, which seems to happen very, very regularly. So as Craig said, my name's Chris Thomson. I've been with Lark for 15 years. So Head Distiller, blender. It's been a pretty amazing journey to come from, a very small family business and watch this thing grow. I think when I started, we sort of had half a handful of employees, and now I think we're sort of 80, 90, 100 full-time employees, which is pretty cool, and lots of whiskey, which is really nice, which is exciting to share. So I know that it's been a big day for everyone. It certainly has been for me. So why don't we pick up our first whiskey? So we're going to try a Dark Lark first. Fortunately for me, I bought bigger samples, so I've got lots. Now, feel free, ask any questions, chuck it up in the chat. I'm sure you guys all know the drill, but really open. I'll be super honest, answer any questions you can. And being around for such a long period of time, there's been a lot of good things that we've done, obviously. Oh, I think so. But we also made a heap of mistakes and done things really badly, and sort of more than happy to talk about the realities of the journey as well. So, but let's start off with this whiskey. So Dark Lark, I don't know if everyone's seen the beautiful packaging. I think I saw Craig may have had a bottle just there. It was hard to see with your background, so you can get it up there. You have to keep moving it around, or there we go. So I think probably that works really well, doesn't it? I think probably, in my opinion, the best packaging, the sexiest packaging Australian whiskey's seen yet. It's completely flown off the shelf. And this whiskey really is our whiskey to celebrate all things Tasmanian winter, except Tasmanian winter can kind of suck, right? So I don't know if there's any Tasmanians on here. I'll sort of scroll down the pictures. I'm not seeing anyone get too offended, I'm sure. But yeah, look, Tassie winters, if you've gone through it, it's cold, it's dark, and then it's pretty bloody repetitive. And so you go to work in the morning. Not that I complain about going to my work, but you go to work in the morning, it's dark, and you come home at night, it's dark and it's cold, and the days are short. And it's a bit oppressive. And sort of one thing that, there's sort of two people in Tassie. They kind of deal with it one of two ways, right? They either go to hibernation, sit inside, and it's a bit miserable, and no one does anything or social at all and waits for summer. Or you do what I do, and we throw parties, dinner parties. You go to mates' houses and have a wood fire and a whiskey or two, or everyone brings booze, and obviously I bring whiskey. And so this whiskey is really about that, right? So the outside of the bottle was wintry and dark and bleak, but the actual whiskey, like in winter, when you're trying to shake off the winter blues, you don't want to drink another stout. You want to drink something that's fun, party-like, and easy drinking and easy to share with your mates and have a fair few and have a good time. And so that's what this whiskey is about. It's about being uplifting and joyous and bringing on a bit of spring. And so I'm sure I'm going to get sued by Disney at some point, but I call this my Disney princess, right? It's bright, it's fun, it's in Technicolor. And I always think like you sort of got your Snow White walking through the forest and there's a bit of snow and stuff wintry around. And yeah, as she walks and she's singing, there's these birds like singing around with her, harmonizing, and the blooms are coming out on the tree. And that's what I always think about when I'm thinking about this whiskey, that sort of moment. So yeah, cheers.
Wonderful. It's got an amazing nose on it. It's so fruity. Like, it's great.
So I think like the way we make it or the way we think about it, well, I'll actually take you back. So we sort of thought about, like I sort of said, like we wanted to make this whiskey for like a party, like winter parties. That's the moment. And whenever we make whiskey, we always make it with an idea of first, how should people feel and how should they drink it? Like at what moment should they be drinking it? What is the feeling and the timing and the person going to, their experience going to be? And that's the starting point. And then we design the whiskey around that moment that we want people to feel. And so we're making a winter whiskey. We could have made that stout and gone heavier, but we wanted to break free. So that's the moment we try to take. So how do we do that? So we wanted to take bright and fruity and fun and tropical type whiskey because it's kind of fun and easy drinking. But we wanted to bring some extra layers to it. And so we actually we don't call this out in any of our comms or packaging, but there's quite an innovative whiskey. There's no whiskey made quite like this on the planet. And so what we do is we take these bright and fruity sort of bourbon casks and American oak dominant sherry casks with these sort of tropical notes. And then what we do is we finish them in these really old muscat casks. So these are muscat casks that have been held muscat in them for, the muscat that was decanted out of these casks had been in those same casks for 70 years. That's the kind of cask we got. So we put this whiskey into the casks unwashed, and so they're full of muscat. And then what comes out of the cask when we tip the whiskey back out looks disgusting. It's like pond water, it's scummy, and it's just full of this dirty, hazy muscat. It looks terrible. But what we do then is we invented this filtration process where it's not like chill filtration. It's not like, there's nothing fancy about it. But what it does is it strips out all the muscat that we've just put into it, and it changes the structure. And I'm going to talk to you guys a lot about how, because I spend most of my time blending and very rarely do you get to hang out and talk blending with a blender. So I think we should probably talk about that a bit later. But it changes the structure, and when it takes it into this kind of sweet, mid-palate, punchy kind of thing. And it's why it's such a unique whiskey and kind of, I don't know, I really like it. I think it's sort of clever without seeming that clever, I guess.
Somebody's asked, Chris, is it slightly more toasted grain? So are you toasting the grain at all for this one?
No, not toasted grain, but there is certainly, like if you kind of look at the sherry casks that would have gone into this, being American oak heavy, so we've had a decent shave on them, and they get, like a lot of those casks get this really cool sort of toasty, the oak goes toasty, but it actually gives like a kind of sweet toasted thing that would look a lot like sort of that toasted grain sort of thing. Yeah.
Certainly that, like, you said, like it's winter, it's all about winter. It's definitely all about winter. It's like that, so warming and fruity, gives you a bit of sort of inspiration, I guess. Like, oh, this is gonna like, picks you up, and then that toastiness sort of brings you back down and makes the sort of palate a little bit more cozy. So that's good.
Having thrown a few parties with this one, I can tell you it does the job pretty well. So people that don't drink whiskey love this whiskey. People who are really into whiskey seem to love this whiskey, and pretty proud of how it's been received. We actually had an event in Sydney where we took, I think, 40 people that didn't drink whiskey, and we had a big sort of dinner party thing, and the only drinks that they had was this whiskey. So it was either as a cocktail they could have, or they could have neat. And then by the end of the night, people are like, I don't drink whiskey. I'm not into whiskey. It's not my thing. Were pouring themselves these big, like, decent dram, like solid drams, and round the fire, and totally into it. So just, I don't know, converting more to the cause, I suppose. Any questions or thoughts? What do you reckon?
Somebody said great. Andrew said great on the nose. Definitely is, Andrew. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Takes a few people some whiskies to get warmed up to start going in the chat and start asking some questions, Chris. So
I've been drinking whiskey all day, so they're all okay.
It's a good question for you. What time do you start at then? What time? Not what time do you start your day at? What time do you start drinking whiskey?
It depends on the day, but generally 8 o'clock would be a kind of normal day. But
yeah,
if particularly maybe I'm a bit excited, then anywhere sort of 6 a.m., 4 a.m. sometimes I come in if I'm really pumped about what I'm blending.
Yep.
Something like I'm really, like, I can't sleep because I'm so excited to come to work. Then 4 in the morning I'll have a whiskey. So it doesn't even seem alcoholic to me anymore. An average day is probably 80 whiskeys I'm tasting. So
yep.
It's it's pretty cool. In fact, that's what we should talk about while we finish this whiskey. In fact, I'll just finish my whiskey now. Excuse me.
81.
That would be assuming I didn't have a couple before I jumped on. So I'll tell you a bit about the actual blending lab that I work in. So I have an office. It's a shipping container, and down one side of the shipping container is like bench. And then down one end's bench. So you got all this working space, but down the full length of the other side is just shelves. And we have about anywhere between 10 and 15,000 samples at any one time. It's pretty good. So I always claim I've got more whiskey bottles than anyone else. But each one of those samples represents one cask at Lark. So we basically, to blend, or the way that Lark works, I'm trying to think what part of the story I should start at. I should probably start at the beginning, I suppose. So when Lark puts together its new make spirit, one of the philosophical differences between us and other distilleries is we don't try and be consistent. We actually try and have a diversity of different new make spirit styles. It's curated, but we do want to have like a bit of heavy, dirty stuff and a bit of light stuff and some balanced stuff in between. And within each sort of style, we want to have a spread. And this is the job of our distillers. So we sort of, instead of telling our distillers they've got to try and be the same every time, we try and allow them to express themselves and to have a continuous improvement sort of mentality. And every bit of new make spirit that we actually produce, so that's the spirit that comes off the still that goes into the cask, and gets ranked and scored and discussed as a panel every single week. And then that kind of gets matched through into a cask program. But we don't try and be consistent with our spirit. And the reason for that is that at the other end when it comes to blending, if we have a large variety, it allows us to produce more complex and different sort of styles, I suppose, or, different ways to express. That's why Lark has such a wide variety of release styles, because we actually go out and do it. If you sort of take something that's heavy and you blend it with something that's light, you bring it to you can bring new tones and new colors together. So if that kind of makes sense, that's one thing that's really different to us than almost or any other distillery that I've spent a few times in a few different distilleries. So anyway, that kind of makes sense. It was a very short version of it.
So where did you work then before Lark? Like you said, you did other distilleries. What did you do beforehand?
So I've been to lots of distilleries. I've drunk and I've run a few different operations for a bit of fun, like come in and jumped on other people's equipment and stuff. But before Lark, I was at university. Did 2 years. I'm a uni dropout, so I'm a chemistry failure, I'm afraid, as my co-workers that have chemistry degrees are quite happy to rub in.
On paper, you're a failure, but in a bottle, probably not.
So, yeah, I basically decided when I was at university I didn't want to be a teacher. I was doing science degree. I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't want to be a research scientist. That wasn't for me. But I love the content and I love science, and I've always loved science. And so I went, okay, I'm not gonna do uni anymore. I just happened to get a job at Lark, and I just happened to have some, I had some tests on my part nose, and I just happened to get lucky. And 15 years of just trial and error, and for lack of better words, fucking up. Made lots of mistakes, more mistakes. I think made more mistakes than just about anyone in the industry.
Yep.
But you learn and you grow, and that's really, I wouldn't want to oversimplify it, but if you just make lots of mistakes, you learn really quickly about what everything really means, and then you sort of tear everything apart and rebuild it, and tear everything apart and rebuild it, and then just a real focus on building teams and empowering people, and that's really been the secret to sort of Lark so far, I think.
So when you first joined, then Lark, did you join as the position you're in now?
I was on the bottling line for maybe 5 months, and then a distiller for maybe a year or two, and then head distiller after that. So
Have you made any changes to the equipment that was already there to suit you, or is it always remained basically what Bill had in the past?
No, not so much. I actually love the setup that we've had over the years. What's sort of changed is we've got a few more stills, a lot more fermenters. The stills have changed because they've worn out and we've replaced bits slightly differently. We have a bigger peat smoker. At first, we could do 30 kilos at a time. We can now do 2 tons at a time of barley. And then process. But the big one's process and the way that we've sort of evolved our process. So what we, like on one hand, we sort of take sort of notes from, I'll go back. So when I started 15 years ago, maybe pour yourself your next dram as well. I just did classic cask. I think Australia's most probably sold bottle of whiskey. I think, I don't know. I love this whiskey. And so when I started bottling on that bottling line 15 years ago, I think I bottled, the lowest number of bottles was cask number 20. So that means there were 19 casks before I turned up that ever got bottled. Still, we were so small, even though it was 15 years earlier we'd been operating, and we'd still only released about 20 barrels, which is pretty crazy. I'm actually the only person, I believe, on the planet that's tried every single Lark release, because I actually have tried the other 19 before I rolled up, which is pretty cool. And so when, one thing that stood out to me in that sort of first year or two is that we were doing lots of single cask. We were a single cask distillery, as so many are of the small distilleries coming on now. But the consistency was all over the shop. We didn't have any signature. There was no, Lark didn't stand for anything. So on one side, you'd be like this light, bright, floral thing, and the next one would be like dark and heavy, and there'd be a pour cask here and a this and that, and it was all over the shop. It really wasn't until our 100th cask, LD 100, it just happened to be that cask was particularly good, went off and won a bunch of awards, one of the highest scoring whiskies on the planet for that year. That gave us a real sense of, okay, this is who we want to be. This is who we should be. This is what we should build our production program around. And then that really started on this continuous improvement journey, because you sort of do the same thing in a whiskey production facility. But everything exactly the same, you get a different result. Well, that really pissed me off. So I had to work out why. So if it's not, it had to be the bits in between. And so you sort of tear everything apart and get more granular and try and control it more and understand it. And it really was that sort of trying to chase this LD 100 that sort of formed the early cultures of continuous improvement that sort of leads to the innovation. You sort of go continuous improvement back then. and we're now sort of being described as being the most innovative distillery on the planet. They're really the same culture. It's about explorations of different ways to do things and how to do things better. So, but it really started with this chasing of trying to recreate LD 100 over and over and over again. Now, the whiskey you've got in your hand is actually the truest representation of us chasing LD 100. So classic cask and cask strength formulas and style and philosophy is really based off chasing that LD 100 sort of style. I don't know if anyone's out there that's ever tried LD 100. I've had like 4 bottles. It's been pretty good. It's a hard life. It's a hard life. So have a sip. Now, does everyone know it's our birthday? Looking at some muted faces. Brian's up for 30. There we go. So it's our 30th birthday this year, which is really exciting. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to tell you guys the foundation story. I'm going to look for some nods now. Has everyone heard how Lark was founded? Some no's and some yeses. Good. I love the fact we don't even know. Just the face does everything, doesn't it? And so, right. So about 1990-ish, right? Bill is up in the Central Highlands of Tasmania and he's fishing away with his father-in-law, Max. And Bill supposedly, I'll get to this, Bill catches this fish, right? This trout. Now, I've been fishing with Bill, and Bill is a shit fisherman. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, for one, I'm not 100% sure how he caught a fish or how frozen that fish was. And then also, 15 years ago when he was telling this story, it was a 1 pound trout, and currently he tells it as a 5 pound trout. So, I think there's a bit of, I'm not sure. So, anyway, Bill's up in the Central Highlands with his father-in-law, Max. They've caught this fish, and they've gone to the Bothwell pub, Bothwell Park, and Max goes to Bill, well, why don't we cook it up here on the barbecues, and we'll get the girls to drive up, and we'll have a bar, and we'll have a picnic up here, make a day of it. Yeah. Bill goes, great, no worries. He goes off to the payphone, calls Lynn, and they agree they're going to come up. And by the time Bill's coming back from the payphone, Max is pouring him a Glenfiddich 12. And so Bill and Max are enjoying a whiskey up in the Bothwell Park up there in Central Highlands of Tassie, or in the middle of Tassie. And, Bill looks to one side and he's got beautiful, clean water. Looks to his right, he's got fields of barley. And he just goes, why isn't anyone making whiskey in Tassie? And that was it. That was the question. And so nothing sort of happened until one day Bill was walking along in front of Customs House, and in front of the Customs House, which is an amazing pub on the Hobart waterfront now, but it used to be the excise department. And he went in there and just said, look, I'm really interested in starting a whiskey distillery. Could you tell me, what I need to do or how it works? And they said, sure. Come in. They brought him in and they took him upstairs and made him a cup of tea and just dusted off the Distillation Act of 1902. And the Distillation Act basically it said that you need to have what is essentially a small industrial size setup. And Bill goes, look, I wanted to do this, but I'm not going to put money. We don't want to start another business. We just want to see if we can do this thing. And so that was it. He didn't sort of gave up on everything from there. Until one day he was walking along and he just happened to walk past Duncan Kerr's office, a local politician. Duncan Kerr, just went in, had a word with Duncan Kerr. Now, disclaimer here, Duncan Kerr likes whiskey, right? It's kind of, that's how things work, I think, in politics. I'm not sure. Likes whiskey, new whiskey distillery. He goes, yep, sounds good, Bill. I'll call Barry Jones, who was the Minister for Small Business and Agriculture, I think, at the time. And so Barry Jones picks up the phone. Barry Jones also likes whiskey. He said, don't worry, Bill, no worries. I'll have the legislation amended. And so the legislation was amended. Bill applied for his license and yeah, got his license. And that basically changed the situation for whiskey. Whiskey producers in Tasmania and then onto Australia, really, as the industry sort of grew. Does that kind of make sense? That had a linear timeline and everything, did it? Yeah, good, cool. And so, yeah, Bill. That's why Bill's the godfather of Australian and Tasmanian whiskey, and yeah, that's the start. Now, there's one bit that doesn't get told too often about this process. Everyone goes, okay, well, that's sort of the story, which is fine. But there's one other really key part to this story, and that is, I have a sip. One night at about 10 p.m., Bill gets a phone call, and there's a Scottish man on the other side of the other end of the line. And Bill goes, hi, and the voice on the other side goes, hi, this is John Grant from the Glenfarclas Distillery. Now, John Grant, Head Distiller, the Glenfarclas, and Bill goes, well, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And Mr. Grant comes back and says, no, Bill, how can I help you? I've heard you've got your distilling license to make whiskey. Would you allow me to help you make good whiskey? And this is a fundamental, this is as big a moment as any moment in the industry, in Lark's history, is that at that point in time, Bill, admittedly, the only thing he knew about making whiskey was from a coffee table book, which is not ideal. I've read some coffee table books and they're rarely right. But from that point onwards, we had the Glenfarclas team on speed dial to help guide us through, guide us through everything that we needed to know. And Bill really took it as an opportunity to understand, I suppose, that once he was helped, then he'd need to help others. And he worked out very quickly that it was hard to, we would be seen as a novelty if there was one distillery, but we could be an industry if there was many. And so Bill went out and really, it was really beaten into me at the when I first started, that it was our role to represent not just Lark, but Tasmania, Australia, and the industry, and also whenever possible to help out with any distillery starting, help teach and guide and contribute, and always be collaborative. And this is the real strength of Tasmania particularly, but also Australia and global whiskey, is that we go out and we look after each other and help. And yeah, so pretty long story, that one. How do you guys find Classic Cask? Has anyone had Classic Cask before? Has anyone not had Classic Cask before? I'm looking at nods and shakes. It's this whiskey is built from really heavy and viscous spirit, and then it's been aged in port and sherry casks, first fill port and sherry casks. We have a relationship with Seppeltsfield Winery in South Australia. They're actually, if you haven't heard of Seppeltsfield, they're worth looking at. They've got the oldest lineage of fortified or of tawny port. Well, they're the oldest lineage of fortified casks on the planet. So they've got port casks going back to 1876, and have port from every vintage all the way up to now. So always laugh and say Bill can even go back to 1876 and try his birth year. You don't hear that. So yeah. Like that joke, yeah. Hence why you kind of get that rich bit of plum pudding sort of thing. I think there's a lot of whiskies in Australia that have sort of, I guess, come from this. And I know a lot of other distillers have said that they started wanting to make whiskey because they tried this whiskey, which is a really flattering thing to say. So yeah.
Chris, as it's been about for a while, right, and then you've got more and more casks there, and you're building up your arsenal of casks. Has it been easier to make or harder to make this and get it right all the time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The answer is kind of both. When it's really small, when you're sort of dealing with sort of 10 to 20 casks, pretty easy. And then you go through this really hard patch where you're sort of blending, you know, maybe 20 to 80 or 100 casks. And then once you sort of cross that 100 cask barrier, it becomes easy again. So I'll teach you how to blend, actually. Let's do that. I'm ready for my cask strength, though. Does anyone have any questions on the classic cask?
No.
All right, we're good. All right. Should we have another whiskey? Righto.
No, we're all here.
So this next whiskey, very similar to the last one, but this is the cask strength version. Up until very recently, this was my favourite whiskey. I've got new favourites now. But I do love this whiskey. This is one that's very dear to my heart. So not trying not to spill my. So how on earth do you get 500 odd casks, you know, to talk to each other in the right way? That's the question. That's what blending is, right? So you sort of start off with this idea of what should it taste like, what should it feel like, what should at the moment it be drunk in. That's your first part. But then I've got 15,000 samples there that need to somehow find their way into being a coordinated, singular sort of entity that has balance and style and feeling and all those bits. That's the challenge. It's a pretty fucking good whiskey, actually.
Oh,
Excuse my language, but I was pretty happy. I rarely get to drink classic cask or cask strength or a lot of our whiskies without having been like predisposed to what's in it. I already know what's in it, so I already know like every bit of it. So I rarely get to experience it. It's pretty good. Pretty happy with that.
I think the same as the dark Lark is that the nose on this is just so like you don't even need to drink it, and you get this wonderful aroma, and it's just like, oh, this is great. And particularly when you don't have a bottle in front of you, you just want to keep smelling it, bro.
Yeah, very, very viscous. It's nice. It's got this thick, lovely punch with it, you know.
Well, that's an amazing segue into what I've got to talk about. So thank you for that. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because if we think about what makes a great whiskey, right? What makes a great whiskey? When you describe a great whiskey, you never describe it as a flavour, right? You always describe it as textures. Once you say, oh my God, well, you just describe it. It says so creamy, it's thick, it's viscous. Or it's thick, it's viscous, it's creamy, the depth of palate's amazing. Or, you know, it's light, it pops off the palate, it's lifted, it's floral. Even sometimes when you talk about flavours, they're half structures anyway. They're like spicy or floral, you know. And so what's great about great whiskies aren't actually flavour-led. They're actually structural. Does that kind of make sense? Look for some people nodding along. Right. So when we talk about whiskey, so often, like when we write down or we analyse whiskey or we think about what whiskey should be or we quantify whiskey in flavour, but we enjoy whiskey because of structure. And this has kind of always surprised me because you see, I can't remember, I've lost my picture of where it was a wonderful gentleman who just described it so like awesomely there. Was that Michael? Was that you?
Yep.
Yeah, right. So you just captured it, didn't you?
You're on mute.
You're on mute. I'll take that as a yes.
It's Tom the Pom, yes, thank you. I don't know why the wife's name's on here. It should have been Tom the Pom, Tom Armstrong. Yeah.
Right, no, so you're labelled Michelle from now. There we go.
That's two running.
So
dances on your tongue when you've got it in your mouth. It's like excitement in a glass.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I've got okay. You guys are being very flattering and validating for me tonight, so this is really nice. So let me tell you. Let me just go back. So structurals where we need to start. If we're going to blend something, right? We start with structure. So how do we deal with structure? Where does structure come from? Structure comes from new make spirit. So the spirit that comes off your still, how that's structured is how structured the whiskey is going to be. If it's viscous off the still, then it doesn't matter what happens with the cask. It's going to be viscous at the end of its maturation. If it's light and bright off the still, then it's going to be light and bright at the end of maturation. If it's unbalanced or if it's balanced, that is happening at the new make spirit level. Does that make sense? Your structure happens at new make spirit, and then your barrel provides flavour and colour, but the structural part happens at new make spirit. So when we're looking at making whiskey and we sort of go back to, we make some heavy, sort of balanced and some light stuff, and we sort of can bring those together. We talked about that before. We're really looking at the structural components. So what are the structural components we measure and we analyze? Viscosity, depth of palate, length, how long it lasts for, a metric that I like to call pop or lift, how much does it sort of explode off the palate, and also spread. Now, spread is the only one of those that can be manipulated by the cask. The other four are all new make spirit. And so when you make something like classic cask has a set of sort of fundamental principles in that new make spirit that drive it. And one of those is viscosity is our number one target. So we're always trying to make more and more viscous new make spirit. And the second one is depth of palate. Should have a deep depth of palate, should come right back. So that's all we ever ask of our new make spirit team when they're making classic cask new make spirit. Make it viscous, make it deep. And tomorrow, make it more viscous, make it heavier, and make it deeper, and continuously roll on that piece. So it was really nice to hear that you thought it was viscous, and that's really kind, because that's kind of what we're going for. The second part, which is even cooler, which Brian says, it kind of dances, it's exciting, is that when we talked earlier about moments that we try and create, classic cask is about excitement, right? It should be an exhilarating experience. And so you sort of like, you look at Dark Lark, it should be easy drinking and party and relaxing. Classic cask and cask strength should be kind of exhilarating, exciting. And then other whiskeys should be kind of, that make you feel like you're the boss, right? Usually I'll put a big F in front of that, like boss. And everyone knows exactly how that feels when you have like that really expensive whiskey sort of moment. Anyway, I've rambled now, but I'm coming back to the process after I drink some whiskey. So, right. Now we've got our heavy spirit, right? We've got all of these casks, 15,000 casks, and they're all different. Now we have to somehow wrestle that into some sort of formal process so that we can firstly pick out the right 500 of the 15,000, and then all make sure that those 500 all fit and play nicely together to be able to create this experience. And so what we do is we go through a process called auditing. And auditing is basically like we sit down and we taste maybe 10,000 samples. So we do 80 to 150 whiskies every day. Me and my co-blender Josh, and we'll sit down and we'll taste them. We'll make a nose note, so how does it smell? A palate note, how does it taste? And a structure note, how's the structure? Is it heavy, viscous, unbalanced, balanced? And then when we think it's going to be mature, so we have this spreadsheet we call our Bible. We live and die by our Bible. You live and die by how good your notes are, right? So we might sit down and we'll do, 5, 10,000 samples a year in this thing and sort of punch all this information in. And then what happens is you go, okay, I really want to make classic casks. So, well, I'm going to select out everything that's going to be mature now. That's a good start. So we're only looking now at a sample of what's mature, or what we think is mature. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go, okay, well, we kind of know that classic cask should be built from first fill port and sherry. So we're going to pull out all the stuff that's on sherry now. We've got a smaller list for just first fill and port and sherry now. And then we're going to look at the structural stuff. I'm going to go, oh, well, I mostly want big viscous ones. So I'm going to make sure that, at least 70% of the ones in this list have, notes of viscosity. And then what we'll do is we'll end up with this list. It might be 500-600 casks long. And Josh, my wonderful blending assistant, co-blender, amazing bloke, he gets the very joyous job of going out and finding every single one of those 500 samples and creating what's called the master lineup. So he's got to go pull out every single sample bottle, put them in the right order. And we get across one bench, we get 500 samples of whiskey that we all think might be right for classic cask. And so what he does then is he goes with a syringe and he takes out about 1 ml out of each one, but it's the right ratio for the size of cask and what we think is going to be in there. And he puts it into this beaker. And then it takes a fair while because there's a lot of casks and you don't want to stuff it up because you have to start again. And so he goes into this big beaker and then we taste the beaker and that's called the master blend. So we have master lineup, gets blended into the master blend and we taste the master blend and it always tastes shit. You go into your cupboard and you take your favorite foods, right, and you put them in a bowl and chuck them in the oven. It's unlikely to taste very good. Now, I've actually been campaigning on this one. I've been saying this, but I'm yet to ever cork whiskey, beer, and chocolate. And I actually don't know. That could actually be really great. I'm not sure. So we get this. We got this master blend. It doesn't taste very good, but what it does is it tells us what needs to come out, right? So you go, oh, it's a bit oaky. Okay, so we better take some of that oak out. Or it's a bit bright. We'll take some bright whiskies out. And we'll just look through our notes and we'll just take them out and we'll reblend it. And we'll do that process about 16 times until we sort of get to this neutral place, right? And sort of tastes balanced, tastes fine, but it's generally pretty boring. And so what we do is we blend back the soul and the moment and the character and the excitement. We'll blend back in more, if it's got to be, if it's classic cask, we'll make sure there's enough fortified in there. We'll make sure there's enough spring and pop. We'll blend in a lot of faults that aren't balanced because it makes it exciting. It's meant to be exciting, and things that aren't perfect are exciting. Right? That's the truth of it. So that's kind of the thought process. So, I remember sort of when I first started making whiskey, I really wanted to blend a perfect whiskey. I was like, I'm going to make this perfect. And I just about made the perfect whiskey. It was perfectly balanced. The layers were all perfect. And I tasted and I just went, this is shit. It was crap. Because it had no bloody heart or soul or moment. And I'll tell some more stories about it, but whiskey's meant to invoke something, right? And when it's just put together in a way that is artificial with no thought of people at the end, never does that. It always just feels phony and fake, and you can sort of see through it, I guess. And so anyway, there's my whiskey. That was long. Sorry, did any of that make any sense?
It's a remarkably thorough process.
It is. It's a lot of whiskey.
It's a lot of whiskey.
In all seriousness, we sort of did a rough guesstimate of how much from the time the grain comes to the time that we hand over the bottle to you guys as a consumer, that a whiskey gets tasted, and we reckon on average it's 60.
Oh.
Every single good whiskey gets tasted 60 times.
Is that what we call angel share?
That's right. I'm a picture of health.
Chris's share.
Yeah, Chris's share. Seriously, because you guys do multiple panels, and yeah.
Chris, what's the average volume, like litres you'll make in a batch? So, for example, your first one, the Dark Light, how many bottles would have come out that first batch?
Oh, you know what? I should be able to answer this. I'm so bad at this. I think Dark Lark was maybe sort of 3,000 to 5,000 units.
Oh, yeah. That's quite a bit. And what about this cast strength and the one that we just tried? It was really spot on. Like,
yeah, so it's a bit hard because we're a publicly traded company. I'm not really meant to say how much we do, but you know, you sort of, you know, what would we be doing? We'll be batches now would be getting plus 50,000 units.
Oh, getting up there, eh? Yeah.
It's terrifying. I was talking to Bill about it the other night. I was like, this next marriage is like, you know, plus 50,000 units, whatever it is. And he was like, fuck, really? It's like, I know. When did it happen? I was like blending, like, feels like yesterday I was blending like 2 cars together. And now it's like, yeah, I'll go take 500. So it's crazy. Wow. What was that? You just didn't hear that one. You're on mute.
You've got to get more bottles. Make sure you've got plenty of bottles.
Shipping containers of bottles. It's really crazy. And like I said, I think Classic Cask is Australia's most popular Australian whiskey. So that thing flies out the door. It's pretty cool. So, yeah.
So straight Classic Cask, is that just watered down Classic Cask strength? Or is that made as a separate?
Great question. We tend to make them at the same time because they'll have crossover. So what you might do is you might do the same sort of, there might be the same backbone to both. So it's not always, it's sort of, it can come and go, and sometimes they're blended completely separately, and sometimes you'll sort of do maybe the master blend will be the same, but then you'll sort of carve off each one. But it is never, ever the same whiskey, just with more whiskey, with water, because it never works. You always, mate, from a work perspective, I dream of that, but the whiskey never works like that. So every time it's got to kind of be perfect, and yeah, and it's never perfect if you do that. It doesn't work. So kind of you got to carve out each blend themselves. There might be some crossover, like you might blend a certain amount of cask together and then split that and then add more cask to that one and add more cask to that one, sort of thing. But they're never the same whiskey. Yeah. It just doesn't taste right. Doesn't. It's not the right experience. So, should we have the next whiskey? I want to tell you guys, I got some stories for you. Any other questions? You should ask if blending is the literal best job in the world.
Is blending the literal best job in the world?
It is actually the best job in the world. And I've got so much trust in our business now from thinking I got pretty good free reign to sort of try, and I come up with some stupid ideas. I've always been curious about this for like 10 years, so I've never had the guts to go, well, I'm trying it now. If I can do it. So if you see some crazy ideas come out of this, well, yeah, so I've been stewing on it for about 10 years usually. So anyway.
Surely the next one was a crazy idea.
Oh yeah, I actually just looked down at my lineup and I was like, what was the next one? The next one's a crazy idea. So yeah. So I want to tell you guys, I want to ask you a question, right? It's a pointed question. I'll ask you the question and you can try and answer it, and you won't be right, but because it's a point. But anyway, my question is to the group. My question to the group is what's the most important thing in making a great whiskey? What's the most important thing a great whiskey does? Or a good whiskey even.
Makes you feel good.
Get you pissed is what I got at one thing.
It sparks joy.
Yeah, it sparks joy.
Creates a memory.
Makes you feel good.
Yeah, these are
something you want to share.
Adam Jones has just written, "You're bloody cheap, mate. You've heard me say it. It meets your expectation. That's half it." So great whiskies do two things, in my opinion. This is what I think about heavily when I'm blending or making new product. Is the first thing it does is it meets your expectations. If you have a sherried whiskey, it should taste like a sherried whiskey. You don't meet your expectation. You buy a peated whiskey and it doesn't taste peated, you kind of like, well, it's a bit fucked. So the first thing all great whiskies do is they meet expectations. But if that's all it does, if it just meets expectations, then it's boring. So all great whiskies also have to be unexpected. You have to do both. You have to meet expectations. You have to do everything that the drinker expects, but then you have to do it differently. That kind of makes sense. I always like to put it like this. I'll tell you a different story in a second. I always think, like, I like car analogies because everyone sort of gets them, even though I'm not a car guy. But if you drive a Ferrari, right, once, you'll never forget that time you drove a Ferrari. If you drive a Ferrari every day, then it becomes forgettable. So with everything great in life is unexpected. Everything is great in life has an unexpected. The most memorable parts, the most emotive parts are all unexpected parts. That kind of makes sense. Something like you never forget the bad, you never forget the good, but it's always to the extreme sort of thing. So you're always, when you're making whiskey, trying to not just meet expectations, but find a different way to meet expectations. Find a twist or a new moment, a different way to connect or to stand out, for the moment, to create that moment. Yeah. So if you're just forgettable, then it doesn't meet expectations either, I suppose. I don't know. So does that make sense? That's what's in my head when I'm blending anyway. Mm. So this one should be pretty unexpected, I think, hopefully.
So just to confirm for everyone, this is the Canotto?
Now, this whiskey's at 60%, the cask strength. I've seen, like, people that don't drink whiskey smashing these things. It's pretty drinkable, I think. Right. So, I'll tell you a story.
So, I guess Coca-Cola.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, there we go. It's a bit like Coca-Cola. A bit of coloriness in there. Right.
The smell.
Does anyone know what Canotto is? Yeah, I've got like a little one here. Baby label, there we go. A bit of a hint on the label a little bit. Yeah. There you go. Can everyone see that?
It's like bitter cola. Herbal.
So, does anyone know what Canotto is?
No, not really. No.
I know. So Canotto,
it's like a cola, but bitter.
Yeah, it's like a bitter cola out of Italy. It's a cola drink. So made with citrus and spices. So this whiskey is a whiskey that's been finished in Canotto cask. The first one on the planet to do it. This actually went off and was the second highest scoring whiskey at the World Whiskey Awards that we'd ever gotten, and was got a 95 at the World Whiskey Awards. It's pretty cool. But how did it come about? I love this whiskey. So I played rugby with this guy. His name's Paddy. Now, Paddy is not Italian, has no Italian heritage, nothing, right? For some reason, Paddy one day just decided that he was going to be Italian, right? He became obsessed with Italian stuff. He got married in Italy. He drove an Italian car. And one of the things he started doing was making limoncello. So Paddy's going to kill me when we're recording this. So Paddy will eventually find out that I tell this story like this, and he's going to give me so much shit. He's like the most like Aussie looking bloke ever. No amazing like Mediterranean bloodlines or anything. And he's got and he just like suddenly one day just turned up to rugby and sort of pronounced Italian words correctly, unlike the rest of us. So, and so Paddy, who's this amazing bloke, great friend, or was a great friend before he sees this recording. Paddy starts making this limoncello. I'll go around to his house one day and we're tasting his limoncello. So obviously asked my opinion because I've been making booze for a while. And he goes, we sort of a few limoncellos, and he goes, "Oh, do you want to try? We'll try some other stuff." And so we tried some noncino, which is like it's like a walnut liqueur, and we tried some amaro, which is like a digestive, and we tried some Kinoto. And that was it. And we sort of that was it. And about a year later, completely gone out of my mind, we were doing auditing work. So we're tasting through auditing these whiskies. And I tasted one whiskey, and just the flavour of the Kinoto with this whiskey. So just, I guess because I've tasted whiskey for such a long time and blended for such a long time, I kind of know what different flavours work together. Like I can sort of, if you put 10 whiskies in front of each other, next to each other, I can kind of tell you what they're going to taste like if they're all married together. It's just kind of, just taste them all separately. Just brain puts it together. And so what basically happened was this Kinoto flavour flashed into my mind with this whiskey. I knew it would taste. I was like, those two things have to go together. Unfortunately, my great memory of flavour doesn't go with a great memory of anything else. And I had no idea what we tasted a year ago. I knew I tasted at Paddy's. As I called him up and we argued about what it was. He was convinced it was something else, and I was, no, I don't think it's that. So we went around and we tasted some more stuff. And we settled on the fact that it was Kinoto. And so I just said to Paddy, I was like, okay, I need you to make me 300 litres. He said, well, so far I've made 2 litres. And I said, well, can you make me 300 litres? And he said, no, we don't make it commercially. There's like, no, we're not going to do it. The thing about Paddy that's different to me is he's a really nice guy. And so literally for about 2 or 3 months, I just hounded him and bullied him and eventually got him to be like, we'll make it. But he said, I'll show you how to do it. You guys have to do it. And so part of the process was we had to cut up, I think we cut up like a ton of oranges and like all this fruit. And yeah, it was all done by hand and it all had to be oven roasted at low temperature. So we had a normal oven. We didn't have a commercial oven. We didn't have any great setup. So for 4 weeks, it was one of the girls' job to cut up oranges and stick it in the oven for like an hour, pull them out, drop the oranges in sugar syrup and rinse and repeat. And she just about, she wasn't happy because hands were sore from cutting up oranges and it took a lot longer than we thought. And anyway, but we basically, through this process, created this syrup, this Kinoto syrup. And that Kinoto syrup, we then sort of hand wrung out all the fruit and we dropped that syrup into casks. Now, we had 3 casks and 2 went off and started fermenting. And there's 1 cask left. So we put all this time in. This is months and months and months. So I think sorry, I forgot to say, but the fruit syrup, the fruit and the spices in the syrup's got to be on there for 3 to 4 weeks, extracting all that flavour. And the syrup goes into the casks. The casks meld with the syrup and evolve and sort of takes all the flavour and sort of integrates it. The 2 of the casks started fermenting. They were fucked, gone. The last one was our last single hope. And so we decanted the syrup out of it. We put our whiskey in and it went off and got a 95 at the World Whisky Awards. And everyone was really happy. So this is batch 2. This is year 2 that we've done this. I actually like this whiskey. This is my favourite one so far. And yeah, that's how it came about. The whiskey that we're drinking now, how it should hopefully make you feel, it should be pretty exciting, but it should be really pushing the boundaries of what whiskey should or can be, which I really enjoy. So yeah, any questions, thoughts? Is it completely and utterly crazily drinkable for a 60% whiskey? Can you taste the disintegration of mine and Paddy's relationship?
When you nose it, its nose is a bit like there might be something like cinnamon or something in there.
There's definitely cinnamon.
Yeah, there is cinnamon in it. Yeah.
Every cinnamon stick is hand crushed with a hammer.
So that's in the syrup?
It's in the syrup. Yeah. So like there's different citrus things like grapefruit, orange in the syrup, and then spices like cardamom, cinnamon, maybe there's a bit of star anise, maybe some clove, black pepper, a few other different pieces in there to create the syrup. Yeah.
It seems to transfer quite strongly when you think if it's just then the whiskey going back into that cask.
This is arguably the hardest thing about the release, is trying to keep the Kinoto in check and have the whiskey sing over the top of it, because it comes through so strongly. In fact, the whiskey that you've got now hasn't all been finished in Kinoto casks. It's like we had to add more casks back into the marriage to dilute the intensity of the Kinoto because it was so over the top. The other thing that you might note is that there's a lot of peat in here. The vast majority of the whiskey in here has been heavily peat smoked with Tasmanian peat. Now, it's not like Isla peat, but yeah, there's a lot of Tassie peat influence there. Yeah, burnt orange is definitely Christmas pudding. Yeah.
I really like it. I think you've done another great job with it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do too. So,
oh, yeah. The peat, for me anyway, the peat gets completely masked by, you know, that complex flavour that you get from that syrup and that Kinoto thing. It's, if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have said, hey, that's a peated whiskey in any way.
I think what's really interesting, because I agree with you, but what's really interesting is if you taste this, I did this the other day. I actually took some of the leftover syrup and I put that with some unpeated whiskey of sort of similar structure, and it they were completely different whiskeys. You wouldn't even put them next to each other. They looked completely different. Both great, but just completely different. And so while you can't see it, it's such a prevalent part of the whiskey, which is, yeah, so I agree. Yeah.
That's great. That's great to know.
Mm. Mm. Yep.
Great thoughts.
Good whiskey. Very good.
Orange juice, but as a whiskey.
Are many people doing this as a cocktail? Seems like it would fit really well as a cocktail as well.
I know sort of really good friends at Whisky and Almond in Melbourne. Brooke and Jules, known them for a long time, big supporters of ours. And I know that they bought entirely new glassware because they were so excited by this whiskey. Some sort of highball thing, which I still haven't gone in and got to try yet. So I saw them before we'd release the whiskey. So next time. They literally got so excited about when they tried this whiskey that they that while we were there, they ordered new glassware to serve it in. So, yeah.
It's brilliant. It's really good because, the one thing we've noticed with this whiskey is that, particularly friends of my wife who don't drink whiskey but drink Kinoto, she's brought out not the 60% one. That's going to kill them, but 40% one, and it's sort of like they get that and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then they keep asking her, I'm actually drinking whiskey here, or are you fooling with me? Because they don't really get it. And they're like, it's just amazing. It's so good to drink a spirit that's like a drink that I love, you know. And then and they're adding ice, and I think somebody said here, great on ice in the summer. They're adding ice and they're adding water to it as well, like a little bit of water as well to calm it down for them. But just the flavour they're saying is this beautiful background notes, and they're getting notes that we kind of don't get, I think, because they're going, there's these barley notes and toffee notes, but then there's the Kinoto on top of it because they're adding a bit of water and they're getting all these more flavors and like a summer's drink, you know, like they're so
I had this really funny experience where it says 60% alcohol, and I had this funny experience where there was this little this woman, she would have been all of I reckon 50 kilos maybe, and she was she doesn't drink whiskey, never drunk whiskey, doesn't like whiskey, and I was like, well, just try this whiskey. And she was there like, I could drink this is really nice. I'm like, that's 60%. So anyway,
yeah, can sometimes be strong for a lot of people. I get it, particularly when you're not used to it. And I think like you and I, or probably most people on the tasting gear, you start to drink cask strength whiskey and you don't find it warm anymore, and you don't find it like, you know, powerful, and you're like, oh, I'm kind of getting used to drinking whiskey. Or then again, could just be very well made. So yeah.
Well, I don't know. I like this whiskey. It makes me really happy. I think it's like, I do think it's like no other whiskey on the planet. A lot of people, sort of, you do whiskey shows, this whiskey's, it's always the first one sold out because there's no whiskey like it, and everyone comes up and wants to try it and then goes, oh shit, that's actually really good. It's sort of not kitschy, I suppose. Yeah. It seems to be all that anyone on the international scene wants to talk to me about. The national scene, how did we make it? Why did we make it? So
brilliant.
Actually, if everyone's still happy to hear a few stories, we've obviously got 2 more whiskies to go. But how are we going for time? I haven't looked.
Good.
Yeah, we're right.
Yep.
Oh, we're right. We're good. Right. So, whiskey. We sort of talked about like creating moments, but we didn't talk about why creating moments, like how that works and why it works and why do we need to create moments, sort of thing in whiskey. And we sort of touched on it. There's sort of, I can't remember the exact words said before, but it's like smell and memory and so intrinsically smell, memory, and emotion are all linked, right? And whiskey is made up, like whiskey is only smell. I know there's flavour to it as well, but largely, if you sort of break apart what a whiskey is, it's just like a billion different smells. It's more complex. Why it's so captivating? Why, you know, rum and tequila and other spirits, you know, are great drinks. Gin are great drinks, but they're not whiskey. They don't have that emotional connection that you get with whiskey. I don't know why. I don't know if everyone agrees with it, but I never quite find that happens. And I just don't think that they have the breadth or the depth complexity of that aroma note. So I think in every whiskey, you kind of have this flash of different smells and different aromas as you smell and as you taste, that sort of connect you back to memories. And it's really, for me as a whiskey producer, it's my job to put those smells in order so that you get a chance to see them and connect with them, so they're not so fleeting. You want them to be fleeting, but if they're too fleeting, you don't connect. Or if they're too subdued with water or too not bright enough, then you don't get to see it all. So my job is just try and put those in order so you get a chance to sort of see that snapshot. That sort of makes sense and connect. And so I'm going to take you back on my journey of, you know, I'm not the brightest cookie, so it's taken me 15 years to work this stuff out. So bear with me. Right. But when I started, I really wanted to make good whiskey. I was like, I'm pretty determined I'm going to be a bloody good whiskey maker. I'm going to learn everything about making whiskey and I'm going to be a good whiskey maker, right? Make great whiskey. And so I worked hard and I learned about how to make great whiskey. And then the whiskey kind of sucked because I kind of missed the point. I sort of talked about this before, which is that whiskey's not a commodity. It's not like your liquid in the bottle there that's not whiskey, right? It's what happens when you pop it open, you put it in a glass and you experience it, right? That's whiskey. It's how it makes you feel. That's whiskey. Once it sits there in a bottle, it's kind of just liquid. Doesn't transform until it's whiskey. And I can prove this. It sounds stupid, but I'll prove it to you right now. Has everyone heard the saying, I'd rather drink shit whiskey with good people than good whiskey with shit people? And then I always say it's best to drink your best whiskey by yourself. But if you drink crap whiskey with really good people, it tastes amazing. If you like sit down with your wife, you sort of love, or you know, your kids. My kids are too young to do this, but I'd happily have a whiskey in front of them. I'll happily have a whiskey trying to relax while they're screaming at me. But you know, good people, good moments. It doesn't matter if it's a good whiskey; it'll always taste amazing. And likewise, if you drink with people you really don't like, drink the most amazing whiskey. Never makes you feel that way, does it? So whiskey is about moments and experience and feelings. And so, okay, that was my first sort of learning point. And then I had my first child, and I drank some whiskey, celebrated with some whiskey. I went to a funeral and I had whiskey. I got married. I had whiskey. I had a second child. I had more whiskey. I had 3 children. I had a shit ton of whiskey. I needed some whiskey. All right. But I sort of just went, shit. On some of the most important days of any person's life, they choose to drink whiskey. If they personally went in and walked into our cellar door or went onto our website or whatever, however, they bought a bottle of Dan Murphy's, they bought a bottle of our whiskey and they took it to their wedding day, then I was like, it's a pretty big honour. The 5 most important days of someone's life, and they're going to share it with the whiskey that we make. That's a pretty big honour. It's pretty special. So we sort of talked to our team about this. We talked about like this moment. It's why we have such an amazing team, I think, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't ever matter what needs to be done to make the whiskey better, to create the experience. Because everyone in their mind is thinking, in the back of their mind, they're thinking that bottle, whether it's label, every single bottle of Lark is hand polished. We go through a shit ton of Windex, right? And it's because someone's going to walk in there and they're going to pick up that bottle and they're going to experience it for their wedding day, birth of a child, or a funeral. It has to be perfect. So let's talk about, people go, what's the difference between Symphony at $150 a bottle and Legacy at $2,500 a bottle? And the answer is rarity. Provenance, some of the experience, you can get from, but it's never quality, never more love. We put as much love into a $150 bottle to $2,500 bottle, because if someone's getting married and they pick up a bottle of Symphony, or they pick up a Legacy, it doesn't change the experience that they're having. It changes the rarity of how much money they paid and those things, but it doesn't change the experience. So it has to be always perfect. That kind of makes sense. So that's why we're, insane. We come to the distillery, we're insane. We go to some pretty extreme lengths to make sure everything's right. It costs us a lot of money sometimes, but when you get our whiskey, it's bloody right. So,
I think we've found that, Chris, in the past, like maybe 2.5 years, is that it's not so much about trying to keep to budget now. It's trying to find something that really captures you and draws you in, and explain some of those emotions really well there. That's why we spend so much on it now, because the past 2.5 years have been hard for some people. They've been in a position where you've been in a different position in your life, and it's something that's basically giving you a hug.
Yeah.
So it's really good to just, you spend the money on it, because emotionally it's making you feel good, not just after you've had a bottle of it.
More
hands, the first glass. Yeah.
I think what I'd sort of say, we've got 2 more whiskeys, and I suggest we probably pour the next one, which will be the musket finish, which I haven't tried in a little while, so I'm really excited to try this. I actually have a really big bottle. Look how full that one is. That's pretty good. That's a solid 200 mils for me. So I don't know how it's going to go for later, but we'll see. Well, if you're using the same glass, it might be worth giving a rinse if you haven't already poured it across from your Canado. But otherwise, it will be great.
Can I just say, if you're not using the same glass, if you do have 6 glasses in front of you, and go back to the other glasses that you've got and have a smell now of the glasses, it's a great thing to do. It's just a great experience to do now. They just changing the glasses. They've been sitting there, particularly if it's a dry glass, got nothing in them. Go back there, have a bit of a smell, and you taste all these beautiful, the barley notes start to come through more. The sweet toffee notes sometimes are a bit drier, and It's just these classes are amazing. But yeah, it's always good to do is go back.
I actually pour myself a pretty decent brand there as well. Right. So the whiskey you've got here is our muscat, is a muscat finish. So remember at the beginning of the tasting, I said that the dark lark was finished in muscat cask and then we filter the muscat out of it. This has been finished in the same muscat cask. This is like 67-year-old muskats. Not this version, but the previous year's version of this whiskey got a 96 at the World Whiskey Awards. It's the highest scoring lark ever. And yeah, I don't mind it. It's pretty good. It's a beast of a whiskey though. It's a beast of a whiskey. So I'll tell you a bit of a story, a bit of a jokey story that we have at the distillery. So when I started, we sort of had this scorecard that we'd sort of made up of how to sort of judge a whiskey, and it's gotten a bit more complex these days than this. But you sort of score a whiskey and you say, okay, a 7 is a good whiskey, an 8 is an excellent whiskey, a 9. So this is on our official tasting scorecards. 9 is take my pants, and 10 is not too shit house. So the highest score you can give a whiskey is not too shit house. And it all comes because Lynn Lark, Bill's wife, who's an incredible woman and deserves as much praise as Bill, but is very media shy. She once was given this whiskey that everyone was raving about. She smelt it and she tasted it. She said, oh yeah, it's not too shit house. So if you ever go to Lark Bar, if you ever go to one of our bars in Hobart, and you hear somebody say, oh, it's not too shit house, you should probably order the same thing. And yeah, the top notch note, 10 out of 10 whiskey is not too shit house. Okay. So I'm conscious we haven't got a great deal more time to go. Do you guys want to ask some questions? Do you have any?
These are greatly different. The dark lark and the muscat cask finish.
Isn't it
Why?
fun?
Why?
Because we can. Because structurally underpinning them, they're completely different.
Yeah.
That's the trick. So you hang the flavors off completely different. Now the filtration process changes the structure, it removes some of the breadth of the sweetness. The base whiskey that went into them are different, and so structurally they have different components. If you sort of go back, if you had the dark lark, you go back and you'd see that the tannin content in the dark lark is lower, so it spreads and it kind of flops around the palate. Whether this is more tannin in it, and it's more oak influence, so it structures across the palate, almost grids. Because one of the issues with this whiskey we had is it was almost too structured, and we had to actually make sure there's enough fortified to give it a bit of free flow and personality, if that even makes sense. And so yeah, just structurally underpinning the two whiskies are completely different.
Yeah, Chris, to me, it's got like a lot of port after tones, and especially when you smell it, you can smell that raisiny port in it. Very sweet.
Yeah. So
very sweet.
You're very right, except it's not port; it's actually this muscat. So muscat's just like port, but it's just a different variety. And so the muscat that's gone into this from Seppeltsfield, the 70-year-old muskats, liqueur style, super sweet, super viscous. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do we have a favourite so far?
Canotto for me.
Which one? Sorry.
Canotto cask for me.
Cast strength is good.
Yeah, I do love the cast strength.
Canotto followed by the cask strength.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to go dark lark because I thought it was a great one to open on.
Yeah, I do love dark lark. I've got to say, like for us that probably spend so much of our time drinking whiskey, and we sit in tastings like this and we go, which one do we love? Sort of sitting back in isolation. you grab a bottle of Dark Lark and get some mates around, have a dinner party and slap that in the middle of the table, it is just the funnest and most enjoyable experience. It's pretty cool. You can't stick this whiskey in a table of novice whiskey drinkers or a dinner party. Otherwise it might be a bit strong, or sometimes it might be a bit pissed. So anyway.
Yeah, definitely Dark Lark for some it's special, but for some of the mates it's got a good taste for a nice punchy, heavy, like I said, viscousy, definitely a classic cask strength. Yeah.
The Christmas larks, would they be in a similar line as the Shinoto one? Because they've got quite a bit of those sort of, I don't know, orange juice flavours, the sort of dried fruit peel sort of.
Yeah, it's interesting because we kind of get there. They're kind of really similar and they're kind of similar but really different. So they're kind of similar but get there in a different way. But kind of in a similar way. Okay, so what Brian's talking about is our Christmas cask release. So every year we do this Christmas cask release, which is a collaboration with a pâtissier called Jean Pascal. He's a French man, a beautiful, kind, and amazing human being, and he happens to be an amazing pastry chef. So he has this bakery in Hobart that's kind of pretty famous, and particularly famous for its fruit mince pies around Christmas time. Now, I don't like fruit mince pies, but I am addicted to these things. It's one of the reasons why, again, the combination of fruit mince pies and whiskey is probably not doing my figure too good. But I'm because I have fruit mince pies and whiskey on tap. So fruit mince pies for at least 3 months of the year, I have like endless supply of it. It's not good, but it's so good. Anyway, so to make these fruit mince pies, what he does, he takes like all his fruit and spices and he boils them down for I think about 10 hours. And then what he was doing was tipping the sugary liquid down the drain, keeping the solids, putting them in his fruit mince pies, and that was it. And then his mate, Alain, who's another Frenchman, who's our neighbour, he's the head winemaker at Frogmore Creek and a really great friend of mine who I love dearly. He and I were, he went to Jean Pascal and said, mate, you can't be tipping this down the drain. That's sugary stuff. Like, give it to me. I'll chuck it in some casks and we'll ferment it. And then you can have it back and, be an extra character, but you can't just keep tipping down the drain. It's sugar and sugar is alcohol. So that's exactly what he did. Now, I was having a wine with Alain and Alain was having a whiskey and we were sort of just talking. He goes, well, we've got these casks. Would you like them? They're fruit mince pie casks from making fruit mince pies. He said, do you want them? I was like, yep, I'll have those. Thank you. Good, done. And so this is how this released. It was completely by chance and they're really freakish sort of thing. And then we sort of had a play with them, came up with the right whiskey and it kind of sung. So, yeah.
Talking about innovative, it's like you just never see this happen in Scotland. It would just something that would never happen. It wouldn't even be thought about. I can tell you that right now. That's
because not even in fruit mince pies do they eat fruit in Scotland.
It's fake fruit. Fruit, what are you talking about? I'm not buying that.
I've never seen a haggis cask yet.
That's right. This is it. Ship it to Lark.
Iron brew cask.
Iron brew cask. There we go. There's a challenge.
You know what? Iron brew cask is my most suggested. I get that one a lot. So
yeah.
Imagine if I had fruit mince pies for half the year and drank iron brew for the other half. Imagine what I'd be like. It'd be shocking.
Oof. Or together.
I do like a bit of iron brew. So yeah. We've and I think this is what we talk about innovation. I try not to talk about innovation, and I'm trying to talk about innovation within the company, but we keep getting described as being the most innovative distillery on the planet. And I just don't think it's got anything to do with innovation. It's got everything to do with, instead of thinking about us or what could we do, or how could we do it. We just try and think about the moment that we try and create, how we should make people feel. If you think about how you should make people feel, then you're not encumbered by any other ideas or ideologies that you were ever bound by. You just kind of just go and be like, well, I really want to make someone feel excited. The only way I can make someone feel excited is to do something new that's different they've never tried before. So then it kind of flows from there. Or for Christmas casts, it's such a, everyone understands Christmas, so it's such a great example. Christmas cask is absolutely drinkable and smashable and friendly. It's absolutely fun and frivolous and complex, but it's fun. And it's if you sort of have that moment of sitting around the Christmas table with all your relatives and having your meal and what do you want to drink, it's probably not this whiskey. This is probably for after Christmas when you're trying to get your whatever conversation you just had with your great uncle out of your mind. That's probably the relaxing one. But at the dinner table, you want something fun and friendly that you can share. You share that moment, and that's how we come up with designing a whiskey like Christmas cask.
Has there many gone wrong? So is there anything you've done that's you've went, oh, this is awful, and you've had to go off and?
I've been great. Actually, I've got a few things. I'm currently working with seaweeds at the moment. I can tell you that's going really badly. So,
for gin or for whiskey?
For whiskey.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's unlikely at this stage you're going to see some sort of cask finish come out using seaweed. Yeah. My first lot of seaweed came and it had a shrimp in it, and that wasn't great. So anyway, but the real one, the one that was really disappointing that I really want to do is there's a spirit in China called Baju. I don't know if anyone's heard of Baju. Like a sorghum fermented spirit thing. Anyway, it's the most popular spirit in the world. It's the most drunk spirit by volume. Really, really polarizing is probably the right word to say. It's a bit gross. It's kind of got some cool flavors, but it's a bit gross. It's really extreme. Anyway, I really wanted to do a Baju finish because they finished them in these urns, and the urns have been around for a really long time. These terracotta urns, some of them have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I really wanted to get my hands on one, do a finish. So I was trying to figure out how to make these flavors work, and that I probably worked on that for over a year. And I couldn't make it work. So there's a failure, definitely.
It's all right. Yeah, it's good. Good to. I don't know if you've got kids. There's a show called Zootopia or something like that they watch, and there's a song in it about you can try, just do something, and if you make mistakes, just get back up and do it again. And it's pretty much like that all over again.
I did that. Yeah.
It's basically like the thing is that you're doing it in the UK. In Scotland, they aren't really doing it, and it's good to see that. And we were talking to Lark Distillery last tasting, and they were saying the cost that's went up. So let's say it costs $90 to make whiskey at the moment. They're saying it's now costing $180 to $220 with the gas prices and the electricity prices and the bottles and this, that, the next thing. The prices have gone through the roof, and and that's the thing. You've got to put these costs somewhere. And this is what you're buying. You're buying innovation where you get to the point where it's great, but by getting to the point where it's great, you've had a lot of experimentation prior. So there's hit and miss.
That's the difference between like experimentation versus innovation. It's innovation via experimentation that is sort of knocking on those doors that like Craig says, in the UK, those doors they're not even there. You can't even see them, let alone, trying to not open them up. And it's great.
I think, so we actually have we have regular calls sort of every month or two with a couple of big distilleries in Scotland. And we're sort of talking top 3 brands in the world. And we just sort of catch up with their production team and our production team. We send each other bottles of whiskey and spirit and just catch up and just talk about whiskey. And we're all big whiskey nerds, so it's probably pretty embarrassing. But I just asked one of the blenders over there. I was like, well, you know, we do a lot of innovation, we do a lot of experimentation. I sort of going back, actually, we got to the end of our first call with one of them. We sort of said, you know, well, what did you guys? Well, they said to us, what did we get out of it? We're like, oh, scale and, you know, expertise and experience and all the amazing things you get out of Scotland. And we said, like, I got to the end of the call. I was like, why would these guys want to talk to us? Why for us? And they just turned around and they were like, all at once in unison and went, innovation. Innovation. How do you innovate? How do you get there? So, okay. And they're like, we're like, would you like to do a call again? They're like, yes. Yep. It was fucking flattering. And since then, one of the major sort of top 3 distilleries in the world have put in our new make spirit system, one of our new make spirit systems. How we manage our new make spirit has been put in the top 3 distillery in the world. That's fucking amazing. It's great.
Yeah, amazing.
Anyway, but that's not the point. I asked them how many out of every time you do an experiment, how many end up becoming part of the process or being released? He said out of 80, 79 are scrapped. And I said to him, he said to me, how about you? And I said, out of 80, 79 make it to market.
Yeah.
Which is insane because I go crazy being like, I've boxed myself into this corner. I'm doing a sparkling wine release. Nobody understands like how insanely difficult that wine thing was. So I don't know if anyone tried the sparkling wine. I know we're not trying it tonight. But for that whiskey, we designed a whiskey around a sparkling wine, decided the sparkling wine was wrong. So went out and bought the grapes that we wanted.
Yeah.
Had them pressed and fermented in the way that we wanted, stopped the fermentation at the right point, put that into the right casks, and then decanted it out of the right casks, and then put our whiskey in. So we designed the sparkling wine to fit the whiskey and the whiskey to fit the sparkling wine from the grapes backwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Nice.
Yeah, it was. And then
so you did it.
The sparkling wine that came out of that cask was terrible. The whiskey was great.
So did the whiskey, yeah.
It was fine. The sparkling wine was disgusting.
Yeah. We were actually talking today about champagne casks and how Europe is struggling to battle, the whiskey industry is struggling to buy champagne casks, but more and more people are trying to experiment with them and do more with them. Interesting here, we don't have lots of distilleries doing that. Like if surely our champagne or sparkling wine's good here, you know, like we've got some good wine. Why are we not using champagne casks more?
Yeah, because like it's really hard. It's really hard to get right. It's really hard to get the right character. It's really difficult. And sort of hence sort of my explanation. I think, in my opinion, other than sort of, I think we did really well with our sparkling wine. I think that was really good. And I got to try it against a 21-year-old Grand Cru Glenfiddich, which is an amazing whiskey. So I had to have those I got those side by side. And I think we decided that one was better on the nose and one was better on the palate. If you have the money and you get the chance to try the Glenfiddich 21-year-old Grand Cru, it's definitely worth trying. It's an incredible whiskey. Yeah.
Well with that. Yeah. Brilliant.
Anyway, should we have our last whiskey?
I'm excited about this one.
I had it the other night. I was like, I'm pretty pumped about this. I'm going to finish this whiskey and pour myself another one.
I was very lucky to be invited to the 30th anniversary celebrations down at Lark Distillery and taken out to Callington Mill as well. Chris did a fantastic job down there of showing everybody through the Lark Distillery. If you've not been to Tasmania, or if you've been to Tasmania and you've never had Lark on your list to go to, you know, give us a shout. We'll try and hook you up some sort of, you know, tour or etc. So you can go out there and have a look. It's not that far from Hobart, but it's really worth going out to. And even Callington Mill is a long trip out there, but because it's brand new and it's all shiny and new, you need to go now You need to be able to get out there and see it whilst it's all beautiful and all done, just brand new, because it looks amazing and the whole area is fantastic. And then try their whiskies as well out there. But I don't think there's a better place to try, for example, Lark whiskey than at the distillery. So very much, very much worth traveling out there.
I think we'd obviously love to host you and have you out. So I think sort of your whiskey experience never ends at the bottle. So if you get the chance to come down to Tassie and come experience it, then yeah, definitely go out to Carrington Mill. I think they dropped a cool $35 million on that distillery. Pretty cool. I've driven it, got to drive all the state-of-the-art equipment for a couple of weeks and have a bit of a play around with their equipment, which was super fun as well. So, Now,
good stuff.
The whiskey that you've got in your hand right now is, I believe, there is bar one bottle left, which this man I think is about to. There you go.
Bring it close. There we go.
Right.
Big and heavy.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool whiskey. So
Brilliant bottle. Yeah.
So we take you back to like our first story, really. One of our first stories when we talked about a phone call that Bill got at 10 o'clock at night. And so we're celebrating our 30th anniversary. We reached out to Glenfarclas and just said, hey, look, it's our 30th anniversary. This is such a big part of our history. Would you be happy to collaborate on some whiskies? And their answer was a flattering kind of fuck yes, let's do it excitement, which was really cool because I'm a massive Glenfarclas fan. And so we connected, and what we basically did is we picked out a single cask of Glenfarclas to release that was laid down in 1992. So our year that we were founded. And then what we did is we took, we were meant to get the original cask that was from 1992, and they were meant to send that over. And they sent us the wrong bloody one. Just bloody logistics in, yeah, it's life there. But they did send us, so we got this Glenfarclas cask, and we finished one of our whiskies in this Glenfarclas cask. And that's what you're tasting now. So this is a Lark whiskey finished in a Glenfarclas cask to sort of really celebrate and just appreciate the moment that that Glenfarclas had such a massive influence on not just us but the Australian industry. To make it 30 years is pretty cool. And yeah, I really love this whiskey. It was a really stressful whiskey to make because it needed to be everything that's great about Glenfarclas, everything that's great about Lark, and everything that's great about Tasmania and Australia. But I think it does. It makes me really happy, and yeah, very proud of this whiskey.
Yeah. It's good that you said that, because that's the thing, is that you've not just got to make it about Glenfarclas, you've got to make it about Lark, and you've got to make it about Tasmania and putting this together. So you've got to have this Lark, aroma, and the palate's got to somewhat have that Glenfarclas sherryness about it, and it's really well done, I feel. I mean, the one thing we're talking about in the industry right now is how we think Glenfarclas will become the next Springbank of, rarer liquid, can't get age statements, all that stuff, because it's so popular, flavour, etc. And Glenfarclas is going to be huge, and being able to do a collaboration with a distillery like that is just massive, not just for you guys, but for Australian whiskey.
I just think that they're really nice, just really nice whiskey fanny people, which is really nice to see. Some distilleries you sort of go to and they're like, oh yeah, it feels a bit, I push the buttons. And some distilleries are like, they're like us. They're insane. They're just fucking excited about making whiskey and drinking whiskey and being whiskey and living whiskey. And you sort of have that, you get on the phone with those people, and that's what Glenfarclas is. It's like, it's just, everything's easy and everything's fun and everything's about whiskey, and no one sort of worries too much about money. We're not very good at necessarily always doing money in this business, but we do love doing whiskey, and Glenfarclas sort of feels the same. So I hope. I think if I sort of go back, let's talk. We'll talk about something a little bit different. So we talk about structure and structures of whiskey and stuff. Glenfarclas has this amazing ability to make. There's different ways you can make viscosity and creaminess, and one of them, like the way Lark does it, is through being oily and doing this late sort of second cut thing from the stills. Glenfarclas does it through sulfur compounds. And there's some sulfur compounds. It's about the only thing I can remember from my chemistry. There's a compound called 1,2-dimethyl sulfide, which adds viscosity to whiskey and tastes a bit matchsticky. Glenfarclas has that in spades, and they do it better than anyone else. And so they create this structure, this viscosity, this creaminess from this 1,2-dimethyl sulfide thing, and it's incredible. And it's just like, I've never, like in my 15 years, I cannot figure out how they do it. It's really cool. But I'm not sure if that was way too much information, but as you can see, I get excited about this. All down to fermentation, distillation. Really cool.
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm very popular and very cool, and I don't spend my entire time reading like whiskey textbooks.
How do you get such a beautiful colour? It's nice and dark and got like a really honey cherry colour through there. How do you get that?
Well, the colour's all from the cask, so we don't do any caramel colouring. So yeah, it really comes back from those sherry casks. So yeah, you sort of see. I think Dark Lark's pretty bright and light. That's bourbony, and this is pretty dark and relatively dark, and so it's all those fortified notes. So yeah.
I like the fact that you've thought about giving everybody, like with the big bottle, you get 100ml bottle. Which means that if you do want that to be collectible, you can still drink the 100ml. I mean,
that was my idea. That's because I was like, we're like, you can't stop people from collecting stuff, but I can still try and make them drink it. I don't mind collectors if that's how they enjoy it. That's fine, but at some point, I like it.
Nothing wrong with it.
Please drink and share the whiskey. Sort of said.
Nothing wrong with it, because I mean, I might want to pull this out. It might be something I want to be given or buy as I've got a newborn child, and I want to drink it now, but I don't want to open the bottle now, and I want to keep it to maybe they're 18. Imagine opening that up on your child's first, on the day they were born, and then when they're 18, cracking that open with them.
I want 100% to do it the other way around. I'm having a 700ml.
This is for you.
I'd be like, mate, this is for you.
Oh dear. A quick story from me. I had a friend that had a Bowmore Black, really expensive bottle, and what was it? He's bought it years ago and had it up on the shelf when we were just left school. He had been given it, and had it there for years and years and years, and he's basically had up there, and his daughter says to him, I hope he's okay sharing this story. His daughter said, I'm getting married, Dad. So, oh man, let's get everybody around to the house, and I'll share some of my whiskey and food and all this sort of stuff. He does dry meats and all this sort of thing. He gets everybody around to the house, and they're all sitting there for dinner. And he stands up, and he's so proud, and he's like, and off he goes through to his whiskey room, and he grabs the bottle, and he comes back. When he comes back, the daughter's standing up, and she's like, we knew you were going to get that, Dad. We've got a bit of a confession to make. What is it? And then the two sons stand up as well and said, we can't let you take the fall for this, And then daughter says, yeah, we drank that about 25 years ago. It's full of tea. And he's just said, my face was like, he didn't know whether it was a bad thing or a good thing. And he was like, oh my God. And then he said, how many other bottles in there? I've got tea in them. And then the young boy went, about 12. Oh dear. He was so proud he was going to share this whiskey with everybody.
He just didn't know it.
That's right.
I've got a question, Chris.
Yeah.
The sulfides, where in the process do they come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer is kind of kind of fermentation, but there's more to it than that. So fermentation creates a lot of the sulfur compounds, but they are changed through distillation. So there's a catalytic process that happens through distillation. The hot copper can act as a catalyst and flip and change them. And then, so a lot of sulfur compounds come through distillation, fermentation, distillation. And then I don't understand this as well as I should, but there's certainly sulfur compounds that come out of casks through sulfur candles. Now, 1,2-dimethyl sulfide, which makes that creamy, custardy kind of note. That's a fermentation. That's a fermentation product. Yep. So.
Thanks.
We can get nerdy on this stuff. Me and Ollie Cook, I've got a technical manager now who's like somebody. He's a freak, and he'll probably tell me that I'm wrong as well. He'll tell me that it's not. It's some part of the fermentation process, specifically at this temperature and this time, that does something. But anyway, I'm maybe a bit more general.
Anybody get any more questions?
Could you tell us a little bit about the Lark Bar?
Yeah.
Because I read a little bit about it, and it sounded a bit like Baxter's in Sydney.
It's probably not quite as... I'll tell you what, I've not been at the Lark Bar at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning as regularly as I have been at Baxter's at 2 or 3 in the morning somehow. So I don't know how that happens. I think last time I was in Sydney, I don't know if anyone's been to Baxter's recently. If you're not from Sydney, Baxter's is an institution in Sydney, an amazing whiskey bar. It's a great place to be. They do whiskey and apple, so it's fresh apple juice and whiskey. And I was there relatively recently. I couldn't drink anymore. But I was with some very important people that needed to drink some whiskey at a relatively early hour of the morning. And so they were drinking whiskeys and I was drinking apple juice. When I went to the bar, I said, I would like a whiskey and apple juice, but can I please have it without any whiskey? They were drinking their drinks and I was like, oh, I cannot drink anymore, but I can sit and drink apple juice. Right? So the Lark Whiskey Bars, right. So we have 6, I think, hospitality venues now in Hobart. So we got a little sort of pop-up story thing near the Mona Terminal, which is pretty self-explanatory. We have our original cellar door, which has a pretty big lineup. It's not as big as Baxter's, but it would sort of be half, 3/4 of Baxter's. That's been there for the best part of 20 years. That's our cellar door. We have a new whiskey bar up in the centre of Hobart called The Still. That's where you can go, very modern, very trendy, cocktaily. But you can try all of Tasmania's whiskies in there. So, and then we've got a gin bar, which is upstairs from The Still, where you can go and experience all things 40 Spotted. We have a gin brand, 40 Spotted. It's we're the oldest gin producer in Australia. Most people don't realise, or in Tasmania. And then we also have the new Pontville, the new distillery that Craig mentioned earlier, and that's got an amazing sort of cellar door setup, sort of heritage style. So yeah, but the easiest way to answer is to come visit us, come drink some whiskey.
Yeah,
I came and visited in February, and the Argyle Street one, The Still, I was just blown away because you could taste so many Tasmanian whiskies. But Lark was happy to have all their whiskies up there with them. And I thought, what an amazing setup.
yeah.
Well, we're still big whiskey fans as well. I mean, it still goes back to we're all here to try and help each other out. And yeah, I'm like, I don't want to just drink my whiskey. I'll love a Glenfarclas. I'll have an Ardbeg. I'll have Annock. What else am I drinking at the moment? I've got a Brookladdig up there. Huntington's making amazing whiskey, which is an Australian distillery. Big fan of the Adams Quality. I don't know. There's a long list. I'll catch up with Will Edwards from Archie next week, and Saturday I'll hang out with almost the entire industry actually at an event here in Tassie. We're all just good mates, and it just makes sense. I don't want to go to the still and only drink my own whiskey. I can do that. Do that here with you guys. So I can. I wouldn't mind going off there and drinking everything.
Because
Tasmanian, you guys should do the same. Explore and drink. It's good.
Tasmanian Whisky Week's coming up as well, isn't it? That's next week? Yeah.
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 So that'll be week. So on Saturday, tomorrow night, I've got is tomorrow night? No, 2 nights. I don't even know what day of the week it is. That's how good my life is. Every day is a weekend. I've got an event with where I'm going out to Hobart Whisky Co, and I think there's 20 odd distilleries. We're all catching up and drinking whiskey together.
Any chance you would consider doing like a special release in a 700ml bottle instead of 500 sometime?
We do. So that Glenfarclas, our rare cask, is 700 mils plus you get the 100
That
mils.
is, yeah, sorry. I thought it was, there's another one that was a 500. So sorry, but I mean, most of them are 500s.
Most of them are 500s. Most of them. I think sort of we did 500 because we didn't have enough whiskey. And then that bottle shape's pretty iconic now. And I think it's really hard. We're not cheap. We're not a cheap whiskey, but we want to be accessible. We want to be accessible and purchasable, and trying to find that balance between sort of demand and price. If we put our whiskey at the same price in a 700, then we just run out of whiskey again. And so just trying to find the right balance. So yeah.
And that's it. It's finding bottles like these, making bottles like these in 700ml that's hard. It's expensive, I guess. That's the way. But like you said, these bottles here are iconic. I mean, actually, when you said that there, I thought, geez, they had been about forever in that shape, and you've just kept to that shape. So it's and even the little ones are all quite uniform. Like it's the same shape. So.
Not very coordinated with all our marketing effort, but the bottle shape is about as far as we go. So,
I think they used to come in wooden boxes, did they not? That's how they used to come.
Yeah, we've had some different iterations. So, the wooden boxes weren't particularly sustainable, and then we had some other boxes with some foam that weren't particularly sustainable. I don't know if everyone knows this, but we're Australia's first carbon neutral distillery as well. So we're trying to make all our packaging sustainable and be carbon neutral as well. So try not to kill too many turtles with bits of floating foam and stuff.
There you go.
Trying to do the right thing. So going to be big focus, and that sort of drives a lot of our packaging decisions.
We're out of time, folks, but I'm more than happy to ask more questions to Chris if you want. Not often you get the opportunity.
Have you got any bars set up in Perth yet, over in the west?
Are you from Perth? I'm going to Perth from Perth next month or the month after. I think maybe October. What are we in? September, October, somewhere like that. I'm heading over for the first time ever. So I'll be over there. Do you know Bar Lafayette?
Yes.
So we're doing, we've got a collaboration with those guys, and we're releasing a whiskey with them. So check it out. We'll be doing a tasting with them of that whiskey and an event with them. I don't know if it's been released yet. I could probably even tell you what day it is. Just a sec. Here, mid-Zoom, I'll tell you what. I'll pull up my calendar because it just happened to be open. Let's see if I can drag it out.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm now scrolling through my calendar. This is definitely professional. So, yeah.
It was so great when you came to Volstead Repeal. What did that be, 3 weeks ago?
Which one, sorry?
Volstead Repeal in Canberra.
Yeah. Oh, my God. It's so much fun. Oh, it's so much fun. Wait a second. Is that where you're from, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, we caught up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I knew I recognised it. I was like, but which tasting? That was the funnest tasting I've had in ages. So, yeah. No pressure, Tom. It's Tom, isn't it? Yeah. Tom, not Michelle.
It's Tom the Pom. Mine's is, remember, 40 years in Australia, and I speak like an Australian now. But no, from right on the Scottish border.
Tom, no pressure, but Brian and I, we had a pretty bloody good night, didn't we, in Canberra? Yeah, so Perth's got to shut up. I think that it will be, I think, Saturday the 15th of October. Probably. Perfect. Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure if it's not the Friday night of the 14th. Keep your eye out, and we're doing. Yeah, it'll be really fun.
All right, I'll tap you on the shoulder.
You can hear me tell all the same stories, but with all the details slightly different.
Sounds good.
Is the idea that Lark will basically move their whole distilling process out to Pontville, or will they still keep going with the Coal Valley?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The answer is both yes and no. We'll probably keep going with Coal Valley. But the fundamental, Coal Valley will probably evolve into more of an experimental facility, and that Pontville will become the main piece. It's an incredibly stressful and difficult process. Just trying to get everything right, and there's so many unknowns, and just trying to do it. Nothing will be like the spirit we get out of Pontville will not be the same as the spirit we get out of Cambridge. It just won't be. The question is never whether it's different. It will be the same questions we always ask ourselves at Lark. How do we make it better? How do we continue to grow? How do we find new experiences? And so that's a really stressful but a really exciting process. And this is the great and tragic thing about whiskey. We'll really not know for another 10 years or so.
Very true. Yeah.
Any other questions?
It's been a great night. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for good info, mate. Appreciate it.
It's been really fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for my introduction to Lark. Thank you.
Thanks for all the support, and I just we making whiskey is pretty good, but drinking whiskey and sharing with others is kind of what we do it for. It's kind of the best bit. You sort of think about what we sort of talked about at the beginning of the tasting about creating experiences and moments. Very rarely do you get to be invited in to enjoy that with other people, and this is this is pretty humbling and pretty awesome to hang out and drink whiskey because, I guess it's what we do it. Why we do it.
You're doing a great job, Chris. And not only that, if you go to the distillery, you're really inviting there. Like you've always got time for people to show them around, tell them what you're doing. I'd imagine your teams. We had a gin tasting a few months ago, and the team were all excited, and they love working with you and underneath you, and it's good to see. So really good vibe at the distillery as well. And thanks so much for taking time out. It's a night away from the kids.
I'm hopefully they're all in bed and asleep now. I can come out and have I've still got leftover of every sandwich. I've got to ask before we go, what was everyone's favourite? What did we like?
Yeah. The 25, hands down, the Glenfarclas.
Pretty good, isn't it?
Can't compete with that.
I still
the Dark Lark.
The Dark Lark.
Yeah, cast strength from me, thank you.
You're doing well when there's not a consensus, when everyone's like, each person's got their own. Yeah. And for me, the question's always, what's your favourite whiskey? What moment is it? What's the time? Check the time. It'll be different next time. So
yeah.
But right now, I reckon I'm going to duck off this call. I'm going to take that Glenfarclas. I'm going to take that Glenfarclas with me. And I'm going to pull myself. I've got. This is how well. There you go. That's how well marketed my bottle version is. I've still got another sort of 80 mils left, so that might be a few whiskeys. Might be a few whiskeys in front of Netflix tonight, I reckon. So yeah,
sounds good.
Good night.
Thanks, Chris. Just let everybody know. Well, let everybody know we've got Lime Burners coming up at the end of the month. Cameron Syme will be tuning in at the end of the month at Lime Burners to tell us a bit about their whiskey and going through some of their whiskey as well. Thank you to everybody that was on tonight. And yeah, take a look out for the video recording that we've got coming up, as well as was it all the discount code? And the discount code for this is Lark Tasting 10, and you get 10% off your order. And I think that's till Sunday.
That's till Sunday. That's
till
great.
Sunday. So
Sunday.
get 10% off your whiskey with Lark Tasting 10 as the code, and we will email that to you as well, along with the link to the video. Again, thank you, and have a wonderful night. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Anton.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Work, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, have a great night. See you guys.
Thanks, guys.